Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Esther Elder, and I'm the manager of the Women's Economic Prosperity Program. And we'd like to start today's program with a land acknowledgement. In the spirit of reconciliation, I would like to acknowledge the traditional territories and oral practices of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, and the Unsqa-Piikani. We also acknowledge the Tsuut'ina and Stoney Nakoda First Nations, the Métis Nations, Region 3, and all people who make their homes in Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. We are all treaty people. I'm thrilled to welcome you to the first YW Women's Economic Prosperity event. YW Calgary's new strategic plan has clearly outlined our commitment to supporting women's economic empowerment in our city, and this is the first of many opportunities you will see in this area. As the largest and longest operating women's organization in Calgary, we want to make Calgary a place where women succeed economically and prosper, to empower her to have what she needs to make the choices that she wants. YW is leading change, and we are thrilled to take this opportunity today as a part of Calgary Pride Week to share and learn about women's economic empowerment and the LGBTQ2S+ community. Our focus at YW has long been to ensure women and their families are safe, have access to what they need when they need it, and have the skills and confidence to thrive. We also believe we have a role in advocating for and with women and gender diverse individuals to create a brighter future for everyone. Before I introduce our panel speakers today, I would like to provide a few housekeeping comments. For those of you joining us virtually, please use the chat function in Zoom to post any questions or comments. At the end of the conversation today, we will turn over and have a question and answer period. This brings me to our panelists who we are thrilled to have with us today. And it is my pleasure to introduce both Anna and Cece. Anna Murphy plays an active leadership role in Calgary. She has offered her time in a volunteer capacity in the roles of Director of Business Development for Calgary Pride, Director of Fund Development for Skipping Stone, and Volunteer Coordinator for the Canadian Rockies Gay Rodeo Association. After successfully completing 2 certificate courses through Harvard and Oxford for urban planning and economic development, Anna pursued her undergraduate studies through the Institute of Continuing Education at Cambridge in the area of international relations and politics. Anna has previously participated in the Ask Her YYC program, Prepare Her, and in March 2021 held a seat in Parliament as the Calgary Centre delegate for the Daughters of the Vote program, being one of only 35 to deliver a member statement to the House of Commons. Welcome, Anna. We also have with us Cece Chow. Cece is an entrepreneur, business owner, visual artist, model, filmmaker, photographer, and plant lover. And I hope I can pronounce all these plants correctly. She creates with Kokedama and Wabiksa to resonate with the nature of our humanness, inciting soulful reconnections to nature and ultimately reconnection to one another. Kokedama translates from Japanese to English as moss ball, a plant growing in a moss-covered soil ball. Wabikusa gets its roots from the Japanese concepts of wabi-sabi, an appreciation of impermanence and imperfection, and kusa, which translates to grass or plant. It is made of aquatic and semi-aquatic plants. Together they express mountains, forests, fields, lakes, ponds, and streams. Cece is the owner and operator of Atelier Secret Kokedama, a concept art shop in Calgary. Welcome, Cece. And our moderator today is Lana Bentley, YW Calgary's Director of Program Strategy. Lana is a registered social worker and member of the Clinical Registry. Lana worked with Alberta Health Services, where she spent most of her time in eating disorders and dialectical behavior therapy, before going on to manage the psychiatric inpatient unit and psychiatric emergency room at the Alberta Children's Hospital. Lana has been a part-time faculty member at Mount Royal University for more than 10 years, and more recently began teaching at the University of Calgary. Lana is Vice President of the Sharp Foundation and volunteers as a public member of the Alberta College and Association of Opticians. Welcome, and we look forward to an engaging conversation.
Thank you so much, Esther. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, well, thanks so much. And certainly hello to the folks we have in the room today who are supporting this event. And hi, Sue. Sue Tomney, our CEO, is here as well. And hello to you. So welcome, Cece and Anna. And I just wanted to say happy Pride to both of you. And for those who are tuning in who are unfamiliar with the history of Pride, it's actually a really neat story. It has its roots in activism, and racialized women played a very important role in the origins of Pride as well. So as we celebrate, also encouraging everybody to take a moment to remember why we have Pride and the ongoing need for it as it relates to supporting the rights of the LGBTQ2S+ community. So let's dig in. Are the two of you ready to go?
So ready.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So our discussion today is looking at the issue of women and prosperity through an economic lens. And we're also looking at this issue as it relates to folks from the LGBTQ2S+ community. So to get us started, I'd love to hear from each of you. Why do you think this is an important topic for us to be talking about at this moment in time? Who'd like to start? Do you want to get us going, Anna?
Sure, I would love to. We know that during this time of particular economic adversity, whether it is as a result of the downturn in Alberta's economy due to a collapse in oil and gas prices, compounded obviously by the realities of the pandemic and what that has done here in Calgary, across Alberta, across the world, that some of the most impacted are those marginalized within our communities. So whether they are women, whether they are Indigenous individuals, whether they're BIPOC, and of course, whether they are 2S LGBTQ+ individuals. So a conversation such as what we're having right now is incredibly important as we start to look at what do the days coming out of a pandemic look like? What does recovery look like, and ensuring that we have a recovery and an economy that truly allows and sees equity and access for all within our communities, not just some, but truly seeing that Calgary and Alberta are places where everyone has the opportunity to realize their full potential and see their future here.
Well, I think it's really timely that you bring up the pandemic, because obviously I think that's top of mind for a lot of people. We know that the pandemic didn't necessarily create the challenges that women face as it relates to succeeding economically, but it did make them considerably worse. So even pre-pandemic, a lot of job loss that was being experienced was among women. And to your point, we know that folks who are racialized, members of the Indigenous community, and members of the LGBTQ2S+ community face unique vulnerabilities as well. And vulnerabilities, I want to be cautious when I use that word. I'm certainly not suggesting that these are inherently vulnerable people. If anything, we know by these flags, these are communities defined by resilience and ingenuity. However, through an intersectional lens, which we like to take here at YW, we recognize that all those points of difference, unfortunately, can be accompanied by forms of discrimination, which makes it super important, to your point, Anna, for us to be here. So Cece, what do you think? If you had to say to somebody, here's why you should come to this really great event, what would your sales pitch be?
I think sort of in the light of sort of through the pandemic, the marginalized have been more marginalized, and like the sort of the rift between privilege and marginalization became really big, or at least highlighted, and where we could really see like the effect of that rift. And if we are going to build a society that's going to prosper, we need to lift up those who are the most marginalized, right? We need to understand that if we guarantee the livelihood and, enable those who are the most marginalized to thrive and live full lives, we are actually guaranteeing for everybody the same things. And so it's sort of the whole top-down, like, economics and care and whatever, I don't believe it works that way. It's almost always bottom up, and like bottom in the sense of, of privilege, not that as women we're less, but often the systems are built to keep us low. And so very important to move to change those systems, I'd say.
Well, it's really interesting, if I can riff off that point, Cece, when we're talking about empowering women economically, there's two ways we can do that. So you can help to enhance the skills and capability of individuals. And we've offered programming like that at YW Calgary. But there's also the need for making the economy easier for women to navigate and to change attitudes and policies that make it difficult for women to succeed. So I don't think it's an either or. It seems more like a both and to me, if we want women to thrive in the economy.
Yeah, and I would just add that, when you're talking about a sales pitch, that it's important to recognize, everyone in this room, everyone on the call, that the conversation that we're having today, it's not a one and done conversation. It's an ongoing conversation, and it's a conversation that needs to be happening everywhere where decisions are made, from the boardroom to the cabinet room. That is truly how we start to change things. So the conversation we have here should be a launching pad, hopefully, to everyone who is joining, or who could be able to join. Because it can't just be in this room, it has to also be spread throughout the community, so that we can start to see true equity and inclusion, and recognizing that economic empowerment goes well beyond just, I can write a resume and I have a job.
Right. So maybe we can actually start there, which is to unpack some of the unique challenges that women from the LGBTQ2S+ community face when they're trying to participate in the workforce. So Anna, is it okay if we start with you? Maybe you can get us going by giving us your take on that. What are some of those unique challenges?
Oh, well, yeah, so I wanted to make sure that, right off the bat, EGAL Canada released data on the impact of the pandemic, to which that it has had on 2S LGBTQ plus Canadians. And one of their key findings was that the community has been disproportionately impacted financially as a result of the pandemic. And many feel less confident in that if their household loses their income, that they'll be able to be resilient and bounce back. Now, and as of April 20th, or April 2020, about 53% of 2S LGBTQ individual Canadians had experienced job loss, comparatively so to 39% of overall Canadian households. So with that in mind, with that data in mind, we need to recognize that the adversity that we experience as 2S LGBTQ plus individuals within the workplace, this is not a pandemic-made issue. This is something that has been around long before a pandemic, long before an economic downturn, as I talked about, previously. These are issues that have been around for many years, And so when we want to look at what specifically, the challenges are towards employment, we see folks being fired from their employment for being 2S LGBTQ+. Personally, I have been fired from employment for being trans. I have been denied employment for being trans. I have struggled and still do struggle to pay, my monthly bills and to make a wage that allows me to do more than just merely survive, but in fact thrive. So these are ongoing challenges that, not only myself, but others in the community face. And so, so that's just getting employment. Then when you have people who are employed, some of the issues that they face include, lack of access to medical benefits. So if you are a trans woman, lack of access to health plan that will provide things such as hormone replacement therapy, laser hair removal treatment if you're a trans woman. So there's no shortage of barriers, unfortunately. So while the successes that we faced, that we've accomplished need to be celebrated, the work's not done. The work is far from done.
Well, I wonder if we can maybe pull the camera back a little bit. One of the areas that we work in here, I mean YW, is poverty reduction, and really trying to break that cycle of poverty and displacement and homelessness that can be so disruptive to family systems. As I understand it, there's a lot of youth in care who identify as being members of the queer community, or young folks who, when they share who they are with their families, they're more vulnerable to ending up on the streets and to be displaced. And I think that, I think sort of in terms of the systems and think, how did we get here? And I'm imagining that for some folks who are members of the community, those experiences of displacement mean not having the same developmental experiences of getting your first job, being able to finish school with your peers, being able to have all those things that prepare you to join the workforce down the line. So I don't know if I'm overemphasizing that, but I think that those are very real issues that also make it tougher for young folks and young women in particular from the community to know what's possible for them. What do you think about that? Am I off the mark, or does that resonate in any way?
No, the way that I tell it to folks is, and again, personally, prior to beginning to transition, I had very large hopes and aspirations. When I wanted, President of the United States, until somebody, clued me into the American Constitution. But beyond that, but beyond that, aspirations of, maybe, becoming high up in a company, or, having your own business or your own success, however that is. But then when you start to come out, on however you identify on the rainbow spectrum, for me as a trans woman, my narrative changed from, I want to go to post-secondary, or I want to achieve, my greatest aspirations. It became about, I need to survive. And I need to survive just when I walk out the door in the morning, and, getting on public transit in the morning without being accosted, or going into work without, being met with transphobia or any other form of homophobic or transphobic, being my own medical advocate when I walk into a doctor's office. So that's what it shifted to. So, the narrative changed from, hey, I want to accomplish, to I want to survive and not be a statistic.
What do you think, Cece?
That actually really, really resonates with me. like, and sort of since my coming out, I've met quite a few people who have, so like, you know, you were referencing youth and younger people, and definitely there are great challenges there. I think also though that, and like, it's really interesting in like through the pandemic, you know, I've heard lots of stories of people coming to terms with their sexuality and their gender, and where through the pandemic we all questioned like, what am I doing here? Like, you know, the reality of I might not make it to you know, next week or next month, like I might get sick and I might die, became very real for everybody. And so then when we're questioning like, who am I really? And then so lots of people, you know, sort of coming out later in life, you know, at age 30, at age 40. And for me, like I came out, like I was 42. And
Stop, you are not 42, sorry.
I'm not 42 now. That's when I came out. So thank you.
She's not 42 anymore.
Well,
So you're both right. You're both right.
And you know, coming from being married and you know, with like having like with 2 kids, and like it was stable, you know, we had a home, we had an investment property that we rented out, and then suddenly, although my ex and I are still friends, like we, you know, suddenly it was like, oh well, we can't be lovers anymore. It doesn't work that way, and then suddenly I was living on my own, and you know, as an entrepreneur, as a solopreneur, you know, I had a lot of support from my spouse when I was married, and you know, that like that support enabled me to start my business and to build it, and like not be worried about like, am I going to be able to pay rent? Am I going to, you know, like be able to buy, like, am I going to eat normally, or am I just going to eat rice? You know, and it's a very similar story that I've heard over and over and over with my friends who are, you know, came out as lesbian later in life, or came out as bi or pansexual, and where suddenly, like, and like you said, suddenly I'm just trying to survive. Like, what does thrive even mean? You know, and when you're in that place, like, it's very difficult to be able to be like, oh, this is my career, and I'm like, this is like this, and this. When you know, everything is sort of in shambles, and it's like, how do I go to work and do my job? So that, like, and it's interesting for me to consider that, well, there's this whole group of people who like never have to consider that, and it, like, it's a little bit strange living through it, and then having lots of like queer friends who have gone through it, and to be like, actually, most people don't have to think about it.
No, most people don't have to think about it. And, you know, as you were talking, Cece, and, you know, to our audience, you know, some will be like, oh my gosh, you know, I mean, some of the audience may have thought, you know, they were coming to and I'm sure we will get to a bit more of a warm, pleasant conversation as we go along here. But this is the reality. This is like, I mean, as you're talking, as I'm talking, like, I'm not shocked. I'm not surprised. And that's the sad and unfortunate things that this is the reality and the narrative that we, you know, through what I do, through what you do, through what you do. This is kind of the point of conversations like this, is so that for youth and kiddos who are coming up beyond us, this isn't the narrative that they face, so that they don't have to go through, being denied. I can remember going into a job interview, thought it went really, really well, walked out of the job interview and was putting my coat on, and the door hadn't closed quite fully all the way. And I heard the people who had just got done interviewing me essentially saying, we would never hire that. That's not what we want working here. So, you know, all of that, you know, adds up. I can remember, you know, sitting down and having an interview with someone, and after they got done, they said, can I give you a piece of advice? Don't have a chip on your shoulder. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, just, you know, give people the benefit of the doubt. Like, you know, it's okay. Essentially, some of the questioning had been a bit, you know, not the greatest. And, you know, they were trying to essentially tell me how I should feel as a trans woman who was freshly coming out. I hadn't had electrolysis. Essentially, it was less passable, to use a really old and outdated term, but one that unfortunately is still relevant. So this is the reality. And this is the reality that we need to change, because it's pretty hard to engage and be empowered in an economy when you can't even get, you know, you can't even get to a point where you can actively participate in the economy. Beyond just a job, beyond just a resume, beyond just an interview. Because that's the thing, you can go and have an interview, you have no idea what someone's bias might be on that other conversation. I've had many wonderful, what I thought were good, you know, interviews, and they haven't panned out to anything. So that's we have to start changing the thinking and the narrative again at every place where the important conversations are made, from the boardroom to the cabinet room.
Well, it sounds like you've both identified that obviously discriminatory attitudes and behavior operating at this level are quite impactful. And I do want us to shift gears just a little bit, if that's okay. Because I noted that some of what we're talking about is when you're going in for a job interview to work for somebody else. Cece, you're the boss, you're an entrepreneur. And I wonder if you could speak to, and I just want to acknowledge, running a business is tough work at the best of times. So I get that it's always hard. But are there any things that you, like, are there any pieces of advice that you would give to somebody who's a member of the LGBTQ2S+ community who wants to enter into the space of entrepreneurship? Are there any key learnings that you've had that you would want to share with them to help them succeed or approach that entrepreneurial space?
That's a little bit of it's a challenging question for me, because I started my business and then I came out.
Okay.
And so I had, you know, for my plant shop, I had a bunch of clientele who knew me before transition. And then clientele who who have met me sort of like at the beginning of my transition, and then those who have met me like sort of now. And so for me, it's been a very interesting experience of like not like, you know, sometimes we have the narrative of like, you get to choose when you come out to, you know, to people, and like when it's safe, then, you know, you come out to like, oh, family and friends and stuff like that. But as a woman who's trans, that's not a choice. Like, the way that, like the way that I present and the way that like I go out in the world, like this is what feels comfortable for me. And so, you know, there isn't a choice of like coming out or not coming out when I am in front of customers every day. And so, you know, I'll have weird interactions of like people who will come back to the store like 2 years, they came like 2 years ago and then they come again and they're like, didn't this store used to be owned by, you know, by this Asian fellow? And, you know, and like in that moment, for me, I'm like, okay, I'm a really bad liar. So like I can't do that. And so the choice is to lie poorly. And like that just, I don't know, and the whole lying thing just feels really not good. Or to out myself. And the pressure to out myself is huge, you know, just to be like, oh, that was me. You know, if I were to tell the lie, I'd be like, oh, I fired that guy.
Continue.
And so like sort of entrepreneur wise, like my particular journey has been, and yeah, so I like find myself outing myself all the time and I don't know who I'm outing myself to. And it's like, is this person going to then go on like Google and give me like just do like the scathing review of my business and saying like, oh, this, you know, this like this business has like a trans person in there and like it's so disgusting, or you know, like that kind of thing. And so, and there just didn't seem to be a way around it. I think the only sort of saving grace is that for me, I've been very open about my journey, and like not just like on social media and not just on my personal accounts, but also, you know, through my business account. And sort of the further along my business gets, the more overtly I am positioning my business as a queer business. Because that discomfort of like being forced to out myself all the time, at the same time, I want queer people to come into my space and know that this space is for you. And if somebody is not okay with that, that means that this is not a space for them. And they are the ones to lead, not you as a queer person. And so I think, you know, and it's like, not that everybody can do this, but like if you can, that type of representation is so important for the community. And then like we have lots of queer owned businesses in Calgary, but like if I were to ask anybody to just like name 3, like it's pretty hard to just name 3 because we're all kind of like I don't know, like Alberta's kind of conservative and things like that. But you know, it's like if you can do it, positioning your business as a queer owned business and like explicitly affirming is so important, because that, you know, that tells our youth that, hey, you can be queer and you can be a business owner. You can be a manager at a store. You can have a job at a business. right? And so I think that that's really, really important, and not everybody is going to feel safe doing it, but like if you can, that's a really, really big deal, and that's a big reason why I've pushed my sort of my brand to, like, on my business cards, you know, I have rainbow edge treatment on them,
Right.
and like I changed my logo so it has the progressive pride flag in the, you know, in the middle of the sort of the O, and where it's like we exist, and then also at the same time that, you know, in the eyes of the non-queer community, it's like, oh yeah, like there's this business and it's run by a queer person and I love going there.
Mhm.
I love the work that she does with plants and things like that, and it like, it's not like this, I don't know, whatever stigma it is around queer people where, oh, they're scary and they're not like us. That representation is a really, really big deal.
Well, I think what's interesting about what you raise, CC, is it sounds like there's a delicate balance in that it's important for there to be visibility of queer-run businesses. I think so that folks understand, regardless of how you express yourself or who you love, a plumber's a plumber. Do you know what I mean? A car salesperson sells cars. I think what I hear you saying is that there's a difference between a queer-run business versus the business of being queer. And it's important to let people see this is a queer-run business, to provide young folks with something to see and to see themselves and to know what's possible. But also it builds community, like writ large. When you find out that the person who prepared your taxes happens to be gay, it just kind of makes it part of how we live. So I think you're touching on a number of important points, and I think I'm not an entrepreneur. I don't have the stamina for that, and I'm saying this in front of the CEO, so she's going to say, still no stamina. Not run your own business, but I think to your point, for those who have that spirit of wanting to run a business, I would imagine that having mentorship and relationships and even people to invest is a big thing that you need. And so even just some of those logistical things, if we want to see more LGBTQ2S+ people participating in that way, there need to be networks of support. And they need to know that there's people who can facilitate those processes for them, to introduce them to people who could invest, etc. So I just wanted to flag, I think you brought up a really important one, which is just mentorship and networks of support for people who want to run a business. So let's move on to the call to action. Should we?
Well, of course.
CC, what do you think? Yes?
I was already thinking about
You were already answering the question. You're like, get on with it, Bentley. So we may have folks from outside of the LGBTQ2S+ community who are watching today who serve as the role of an employer. We may have people from HR departments watching. So there may be folks who don't just want to be allies, but want to be accomplices in helping to create positive disruption where they work, to make their environments affirming and inclusive. What would your suggestions be for those folks around how you can make the workplace and the workspace more inclusive and affirming? What are some concrete suggestions you might share?
Policy, education, involvement, leadership. So you need to ensure that you have policies in place that promote an equitable, inclusive workplace. Some really simple ones could be, do you have your pronouns in your email signature? It's a really simple one, costs absolutely nothing, and it's a really good, strong sign of allyship to folks like me who are transgender or gender diverse. Costs nothing, takes 5 seconds to update your email signature. Then you can go into bigger, a bit more labor intensive, and by a bit more I mean like a smidgen more. You can literally print off a sign off of any printer, and that's creating gender inclusive washrooms, making sure that you have space for because the other thing is when we're talking about policies, they don't just impact your employees, they impact your clients. So if you're a retailer and you have people coming in, I am a customer. I go to a grocery store. I go into retailers. I interact with businesses. So me as a trans woman, I'm a customer as much as I am an employee. So having good policy that creates equity and inclusion for your employees, it also creates it for your clients, whatever your clients look like. Education. Not everyone is an expert. Heck, I live in this space. I am part of this community and I'm not an expert in it. But there are people out there who are not necessarily experts, but they can help to provide education and knowledge on what some of the best practices are. There's lots of diversity, people who offer diversity training out there, and they can focus it on there's how to be a better workspace, or just a better space in general for trans folks, or two-spirit folks, or indigenous, all these different things. There are people out there. This is how they make their living. They go, they help educate, they allow the questions to be asked. So get the education, and not just, again, Cece, you talked about the top down. A lot of times when we see this training being implemented, it's the CEO, it's the senior vice presidents, it's all of that. Yes, but also get the bottom people as well. And when I say bottom people, not in a derogatory way, but the front line, the people.
So the individual contributors.
The people who are on the front lines, people who are actually, face to face facing with these individuals, so that they have, because the CEO probably isn't going to be the one who's in the grocery, standing at the grocery checkout, bringing people through. And, that's normally when you're going to get it. They're not going to be the bank teller who's going to use your dead name or your old pronouns. It's not going to be the CEO that's doing that. CEO might, be in a conversation and it might work for him or her or them. But you need to make sure that the education and the training goes throughout your organization. So the other is involvement. So you need to ensure, when you're looking around, the boardroom or whatever it is that you're doing, who's not there, who's missing, who's not at the conversation, who's not represented, and get their involvement, because employers, or there are people out there, there are people who are incredibly competent. I know so many, whether they're trans or gender diverse, there is such a huge wealth of knowledge and, ability out there. Get them involved, ask them to be a part of it, and get their involvement. The second is leadership. So it really does help to, when we look into a board, or the executive of a company, if you're seeing a trend, which in corporate a lot of the time, and even outside of corporate, in non-government organizations, non-profits, politics, whatever the case is, there's a bit of a trend of what those folks look like that are, making the decisions and calling the shots and making the policies and guiding the direction. Typically, they look ever so slightly masculine and ever so slightly cisgendered and ever so slightly heterosexual. Now, that's not to say that is in all cases.
You were very subtle there, but
thank you.
But I like that you preface it with ever so slightly.
I pride myself on my subtlety at times. And again, it's not that we're saying, I'm not sitting here saying, okay, well, get rid of men, get rid of, no, I mean, absolutely. But I'm just saying, you build a bigger table, and not only build a bigger table and invite more people to it, but pull the chair out for folks and invite them to take a seat and get involved. So, if you're doing a CEO search, or, I know the city of Calgary right now has open call for, their boards and committees right now. So there you go, for folks who live in Calgary, put your name out there, get involved, because that's how we really create equity and inclusion, is getting more people involved. If it's the same people and they look the same and it's the same and the same and the same, it's going to be pretty hard to create, to open it up and get to true equity.
Well, Anna, I wonder if I can riff off that for a minute, and
Sure, yeah.
I need to attribute this to, this is not my idea, it might be Malcolm Gladwell, but be wary of the idea of over-celebrating firsts. And people may be familiar with that idea, but, well, we had the first blank, and then the celebration focuses so much on having the first person who represents this underrepresented group that we lose momentum around the second, third, fourth, and fifth. And really, it should be about having environments where it's not actually noticeable that we have our first and only, but we have talent and awesomeness that comes in all shapes and sizes and colors. So I just wanted to say, to your point, even when we invite people to the table, the phenomenon of being overly invested in the notion of a first, quite often that's the last. Because we've got one now. Does that make sense, versus having an environment of?
It does, and that yeah. So when I see build a bigger table and invite them to it, not a one and done. It's kind of like this. It's kind of like this conversation. This should not be a one and done conversation. Folks who are watching, folks who are listening, hopefully, should be inspired by what CC has put forward and yourself have put forward, and hopefully they're inspired to now go and be like, hey, let's have another conversation in our own organization or wherever we're at. So just like this conversation should not be a one and done. Hopefully people don't log off, and hopefully they're still awake, because it is Zoom. Sometimes on Zoom we start to sound a bit like the Charlie Brown teacher a little bit when we're on Zoom for so long. But hopefully they go and they are like, hey, let's have a conversation at my organization. Let's have a conversation, like you said, they may be HR professionals, they may be people who have power and authority or privilege, as we hear a lot now. They have the ability to help guide change. Whether it's in a corporate world, a nonprofit world, a political world, all of these different, if you have the ability to drive that change, then do something with it. Because that's the thing, when you set the call to action, that's the thing. We can have a great conversation here and walk out the door and do nothing with it. People can tune into this conversation and be like, okay, here we go. I've done my pride thing. I listened, great. And they move on with their life. Well, I don't even know why you joined the conversation. Like, the whole point of having conversations is so that we can walk away and hopefully implement meaningful and tangible change. Because that is quite clearly what communities, whether it's 2S LGBTQ, Indigenous, people of color, that's what they're wanting. They want action. They don't need warm, fuzzy statements from anybody. They want action. They want action.
So I think, to your point, in looking at that call to action, I think learning and unlearning can be very difficult processes. And I'm reminded of the quote by Anne Bishop, who says, you may not be a perpetrator, but chances are somewhere along the way, you may have accidentally been a perpetuator. And sometimes that comes from, even if you're not actively being mean to people, sometimes not taking a second to ask the question, but I wonder how other people might feel. It allows those things to slide, Anna. And I think I'm a bit of an optimist, but I think that's where most people kind of fall, is they're not actively doing things that make it difficult for lesbian, bisexual, transgender, non-binary folks, but forgetting to ask, what is it like to work here for a person who's different than me? I think that's one of the biggest things. And then it's so overwhelming sometimes to realize maybe I've been saying or doing things for years that have inadvertently been unwelcoming. But if I'm hearing you correctly, Anna, I think part of this is also about giving ourselves permission to learn and make mistakes and grow, but do something. do something to try and be a little bit more helpful. So Cece, did you want to jump in on this about, yeah, what's your call to action?
I think my call to action is if you control money, then you really have the power to change things for lots of people. And so when I say, you know, when you have control of money, it's like the banks, the government, whether it's, you know, civic or provincial or federal. When you have the money, you have the ability to make opportunities for people. And
that's big.
With those opportunities, then we can have that. It's like this weird top-down feeding from the bottom up. And we kind of hopefully meet in the middle somewhere, someday, you know, when we've really, you know, sort of reached this point of equity, you know, that's sort of the dream. But, and like, it's not just banks, you know, like if you own a business and you just happen to be doing well, scholarships, like those are amazing.
Yeah.
Or like a mentorship program, like we're gonna sponsor, like we're gonna give you $1,000 to like start your idea, start your business, and we're gonna walk with you through it. Like,
yeah.
And like those are those are the opportunities that are going to get us to places where it's like, now we have representation. And now that, you know, kids are like, wow, like it's not that I'm gonna come out and this is like everything is gonna go in the toilet, you know, or like later, somebody coming out later in life and it's like, I just set fire to everything that I know. And it feels like the end, but to see that people have come through it and are thriving and living full and meaningful lives, then suddenly it's like, no, this is not the end. This is the beginning.
Way to go. Well, Cece, you know what I hear both of you talking? So the term inclusive prosperity, and I'm by no means an economist, but I do know that there's a growing movement of folks who are saying that we can no longer measure prosperity simply by economic indicators. It's also about measures of wellness, so education, people having access to the basic necessities to live. And what's interesting about the comment, the reason I reacted to that about, you know, I think that's an important point to punctuate is I think sometimes when we're trying to achieve inclusion, we believe that that's just in the realm of social activism, and it's not. People who can influence business, how resources are distributed, people who can use and leverage those resources to mentor the next generation of business leaders in the community. I think leadership around achieving equity and inclusion comes from many different places, and some of it will, to your point, come through a more economic lens, and some of it will come through a more policy lens, and some of it will be through a social justice lens. But I think that's a really interesting point, because we may have some folks who are watching today who are like, I'm not so good at the social justice angle, but but I own a company. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm a contractor, or I own an auto body shop. Like, what could I do? And what I hear you saying is put your money where it can have the most impact. And that's where I think organizations like ours are really trying to experiment around how do we create impact in various spaces using various levers that we pull. And some of that must be economic, or am I being too businessy now? Like, what do you think about that?
I mean, yes. I also feel that it's like, if we were to prosper, like we all have to prosper together.
Well, you know, that reminds me of, so the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, said something, and it has stuck with me. Economic growth at the cost of individuals isn't economic growth at all. It's failure. So if you can have all of this growth, and so if we break that down, if you're a company and you have a company or even an individual, and you have a platform where you have success and you do nothing with that success, whether it's financial or having a large following or whatever it is, then what's the point of having it? What is the point of having all of it if you can't do something good with it? That's the way I was raised, was, you know, being able to, you know, if you have some success in life, or, you know, and success can be, you know, it doesn't have to be, you know, monumental, you know, huge, you know, Jeff Bezos level success, or exploitation, whatever one would like to, you know, refer to it as. Anyways, moving on. Subtlety, remember subtlety.
You're taking up that space.
So whatever it looks like, I was raised that, you know, you extend a hand back to those who might not necessarily have as much as you do. And you know, that's, you help them along too. You reach back and you pull somebody along with you. So again, back to that, you know, getting people involved. You know, if you are, you know, sitting on a board of a corporation, or, you know, you're sitting on the board of a nonprofit, whatever it is, get people involved, because I guarantee there are people out there who will be willing to get involved and come. Pay them would be wonderful too. So that we can, again, get more people involved in the economy. When we talk about economic empowerment, pay them for what they're worth. And, you know, and at the end of the day, have them be part of your leadership. Again, don't just offer them a spot at the table, give their voice, amplify their voice.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So Cece and Anna, obviously you're now a victim of your own success, because we have lots of questions rolling in from the chat box. So I'll do my best to read these. I have my computer glasses on.
I was going to say that's good, because I can't see that far without my glasses.
Or just glasses when you turn 41. Let's just call them for what they are.
Okay, what skincare do both of you? Clearly I'm doing something wrong. Thank God I'm going to see the facial after this. I'm like, geez, Louise. Anyways, continue on. Continue on. We'll chat about that after.
Should we tell her? I don't know.
Hey, that's not very equitable.
We're gonna prosper. We have to all prosper together.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. If we're all going to be incredibly nun-looking, you know, share the love.
Well, could you just scroll down actually, just so I can take a looky-loo? Okay, so let me, okay, I want to do a question that's youth specific, because the Y in YW is for young. So I do want to do a shout out to this youth specific question. So for both of you, what do you think is the biggest barrier for LGBTQ, actually, let me say youth from the LGBTQ2S+ community. What do you think is the biggest barrier for those folks to obtain some level of economic prosperity, or let's even just break it down, just getting their foot in the door in the workplace?
Well, when we talk about 2S LGBTQ youth, we need to recognize the number of them who face homelessness as a result of being cast out by their caregivers, whether that's parents or what have you. So it's pretty hard to get a leg up in terms of employment when you're living on the streets. There are current numbers out where we have a 250,000 2S LGBTQ youth in Canada who are living on the streets. So when we talk about employment, well, we first need to ensure that they have a roof over their head, but more so to the point we need to ensure that they have affirming, welcoming, and accepting individuals around them at all levels, from the home to the school to the community around them.
And before you answer, Cece, so I've now taught for so long in post-secondary that when I started, it was a college. And you had to line up for the computer. But you know what's really interesting is in now 12 years of teaching, I can't tell you how many students still tell me, you're the first Black teacher I've ever had. And the difference that it makes just for people to see somebody in a position where there's some level of, I don't want to say authority, but to see yourself doing things that you don't ordinarily see is so impactful. And so just as a call to action, I think there's a lot of young folks out there who are watching to see the adults in their lives start to become more visible. And to your point, it's about time and perspective shifting. As difficult as things are now, here's somebody who's been through things, living a fulsome, rich life. So I do want to say, I often say she can't be what she can't see, but I would say they can't be what they can't see writ large. So I do think it matters for grownups who are in the workforce to pave the way and hold the door open for others. So Cece, young people, how can they maybe not just beyond recognizing the barriers, how can they overcome them? And how can grown-ups around them help youth overcome these barriers?
I truly believe that, you know, like our youth, they're so smart, they are so strong, and they are outspoken, and like, as much as people like to complain about Gen Z, I have so many hopes pinned on Gen Z right now. And it's, I think, for us, you know, sort of as a preceding generation or generations, to listen and to hear and to see the things that they are experiencing and the things that they are expressing. And it's like, because they are very outspoken. Like if you spend like an hour on TikTok, like they're just like, they're so well spoken.
Cece, I would never do that.
Right?
And young people, they don't want me there.
But the way they speak about social issues,
agree,
the
yeah.
way that, like, the way that they do their research and they collaborate, and the way that they are able to understand in ways that we were never able to do growing up, like, we need to listen to them. You know, it's like, what do you need? What can I give you so that you can prosper, so that you can be empowered? And like, I really believe it's like I can do like so much up to a point. But if you can empower a whole generation, like, and like in the way that they do things, like the way that, you know, over the last, like over the pandemic, you know, how the Black Lives Matter, like how that movement exploded, is because the young people were saying, this is not right.
That's right.
And they stood up and they made noise and they got on social media and they were on the streets, and then we joined them. So I think we should be asking them, how do we help you change the world so that I can have a better world?
It's going to be hard to top that response. But that's really neat, and I want to amplify that. What do you need from me? And I think that's such a simple question, hey. But I guess the only thing that prevents it from working is just we don't ask it. So asking folks, what do you need from me to help you? Okay, so we have more questions rolling in. Okay, let's talk about opening a smaller, medium-sized business. And so start with you, Cece, and then Anna, if you have any ideas. So Cece, certainly there is a political climate that at times has not been affirming to queer folks and trans folks in the province. And so this has invited some folks from the LGBTQ2S+ community to be hesitant about starting a small business and putting themselves out there. Do you have any words of encouragement for those folks, or advice, suggestions?
I think, like for me, I feel like all of our, the places that we are, there are very definite pockets of people who are affirming and supportive and who are like true allies when the poo hits the fan, they're actually there.
That's right.
And I think when I first came out, I was afraid to find my people. It felt intimidating because it's like I'm just newly out. Like what do I know? And it's like this, sort of this. What value do I provide? And like obviously, as humans, like our value is not around what we can do for somebody. Like we just have value as people. And it's like, for me, I got stuck in that, but I would encourage you to go and find community and get that support, and find out where, sort of where your people are and where safe spaces are. And it's like, if you need to retreat, like, where do I retreat to? Because there's going to be days where you need to retreat, and that you need people who are going to stand up and say, this is my family. Step back. You don't get to talk to them that way. You don't get to treat them that way. And so, like, for me, like, it was really scary. And like, eventually, I did find my people who did do that for me. And I think that's just like super important. And that you don't have to do it on your own. You don't have to do it by yourself.
So I'm hearing you say that a community, and again, those networks, not just of motivation and encouragement, but I also think those networks are an important source of who's a realtor who's really good to work with, who's a bank. Do you know what I mean? Where they've given loans to people from our community in the past, who's a marketing firm who gets it. So I think that those networks of support are really important. Okay, so we're gonna ask, in the spirit of being young and modern, here's the next question. Anna. And by the way, do we have a hashtag for today's event? Hashtag YYC Women, hashtag Calgary Pride. And if anybody's looking us up online, it's at YW Calgary. That's our Twitter handle.
Was that my question? What's the hashtag?
No, not at all. No.
I was going to say, because you answered it for me.
Okay, so question, because you're very effective on social media. Your social media game is on point. Can you recommend any podcasts or online resources that people can access to continue learning? And I love the question, because after today, everybody gets homework. Where can people turn for more information, Anna?
Well, I mean, I always love when people say I'm so effective on social media. I'm like, I am far from being like Kim Kardashian or Kanye West. Like I'm not that effective. There are people far more effective and influential than I am. But anyways, thank you for that compliment. So in terms of resources that people can reach out to, I mean, I'll put myself out there. I don't mind folks, reaching out to me. But if people are like, I really don't want to reach out to her, I'm like, okay, well, that works too. Some better resources even than myself are organizations. So here within Calgary, we have a tremendous amount of really remarkable and phenomenal organizations that do so much work, advocacy, and really move the needle forward. One of them of which is Skipping Stone. Another one is Calgary Pride, HIV Community Link, Calgary Queer Arts Society, Center for Sexuality, Outlink, YW. You're welcome. This conversation is sponsored by the letters YW. Sesame Street reference there. So in addition, so that's just within Calgary. You can go beyond Calgary. There's EGAL Canada, who I mentioned earlier. They're a national organization. There's TransPulse, which more or less is a survey, but it gives some really tangible realities of what the trans community is facing. There's Trans Equality, which is based out of the United States, but has a global outreach and look. There's the Trevor Project. There's Stonewall in the United Kingdom. There's Mermaids, which is also based out of the UK. So there's lots of really incredible organizations out there. But if we're talking specific in Canada, EGAL has some really incredible, tangible. There's resources out there, and it's in Canada. So there you go. EGAL, Skipping Stone, Calgary Pride, Center for Sexuality, YYC Outlink, HIV Community Link, Mermaids, Trevor Project, Trans Equality, TransPulse. There's a few.
Okay.
Can I add one more?
I would, yes.
Just for sort of on the entrepreneur sort of side of things, there's the LGBT Chamber of Commerce. That's a really good way to connect with queer owned businesses and those types of services like realtors and bankers and for getting mortgages and all that stuff.
Okay, so Anna listed off several hundreds of organizations.
You asked.
I did, and luckily this is being recorded so you can rewind and listen to everything she said there. And then CCU said the LGBTQ2S+ Chamber of Commerce. So I think maybe rather than, because we only have a few minutes left, so maybe what I'll do is I think let's finish how we started this part of the conversation. So the roots of Pride were very much around activism and folks fighting to get their needs met and for visibility. And here we are now at YW Calgary having this conversation. So as difficult as things are, I think fair to say progress has been made, and conversations like this today are such a good exclamation point in some of those sentences that write our history, that we are moving ahead and we're moving ahead together. So before we bring this part of the conversation to a close, is there anything that either one of you would like to share for folks who are watching around a message, economic prosperity for women from the LGBTQ2S+ community? to the final word before Esther comes back.
Well, my final message wouldn't necessarily be strictly focused towards, economic prosperity, but born out of a reality that we see facing trans and gender diverse individuals. We see a growing, level of polarization, misinformation that is out there. To put it quite bluntly, we see an attack on trans and gender diverse individuals. And I'm going to end it really simply with trans women are women, trans men are men, and our rights are human rights. And part of that right is to being able to be part of their community, the community that they call home, whether it's here in Calgary, Alberta. You mentioned earlier, Lana, about the polarization that's out there, and I'm very aware of the political climate that is out there. And so that's my message: is that you have space here. You are valid. You are loved, and this community is just as much your home as it is mine or as it is anyone else's. So that's my message, not just about the economy, but that you are truly valid, loved, and supported. And if there's anything that I can do or can give any help, well, I'm sure we'll find out a way that can get you in touch. But yeah, so trans women are women, trans men are men. You're valid, and your rights are human rights. And I'm proud to fight for those every damn day if I have to.
Thank you, Anna. Okay, Cece, anything you'd like to say in closing?
I think just that, like, similar to you, Anna, like, I don't think what we're talking about is truly about economic empowerment. What we've been talking about is just empowerment, because without empowering people, there is no economic empowerment. If the systems in which we live keep groups of people on the floor, it doesn't matter what we do, they will never have economic empowerment, because everything in the system says you are less, you don't belong, you don't get to rise up. And so what we're really talking about is empowerment and lifting up the people who I don't want to say have the least, but the people who are pushed down the most. And when we can guarantee that, rights and just lives for those people, then we are guaranteeing lives for all of us, and we are empowering all of us, and we are giving all of us economic empowerment.
Thank you very much, Cece, and thank you very much, Anna. I'll turn it back over to you, Esther.
Wow, I have to say, what an incredibly compelling conversation and topics today. Extremely thought-provoking conversation. I just want to thank you, Cece and Anna. Thank you for speaking up and for speaking out. Thank you for sharing your stories with us, stories of success, your willingness to contribute to other young people that are trying to make it in today's world. There's lots of barriers, as we talked about. So offering your mentorship and your guidance, we are extremely grateful. So thank you for that. A couple things that stood out to me, and I loved it. We prosper together. Love that. And I also love what Lana said earlier, the LGBTQ2S community is defined by resilience. And that true equity and inclusion starts with each other. It starts with speaking up. It starts with having those conversations at a local level, to advocate for systems change, to change attitudes and to change policies. I love the examples, Anna, that you shared really from a organizational or business perspective, the things that we can put into place very cost effectively and what a big difference it makes. And looking at changing the narrative that we have. Cece, I really liked some of the takeaways that you shared about being an entrepreneur, and some things that we can do for that. One is to be open about the journey. By being open about it, or we really are teaching the other generations, this is normal, it's okay. To position as a queer-owned business does send a strong message to youth and young people. And again, mentorship and relationships, having people to invest, networks of support as we are looking at being entrepreneurs and starting businesses. Love the calls to action, inviting people to sit at the table and to get involved and to make those opportunities for the LGBTQ2S community. So to that end, we really appreciate Cece and you sharing your stories with us and your insights. Please come on up if you like. Lana, thank you so much for moderating today.
My pleasure.
And I should probably refer to my actual comments here.
Well, thank you.
We'd also like to thank you attending virtually today. We plan to offer more of these events, including our next event, which is planned for October 7th to celebrate the International Day of the Girl. So mark your calendars, October 7th, we are celebrating International Day of the Girl. Also, please let us know how we can improve on the process to ensure it's enjoyable for everyone. And to this end, please note that we will be emailing you a quick survey and really appreciate and thank you in advance for completing that and getting that back to us. So that is a wrap for now, and we prosper together. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.